She was 21, but still lived like a child forbidden to feel. Raised between prayers and silence, she had never been touched, until she met him. On their first night together, she cried out, "Take it off, I can't stand it anymore." If you love stories of romance and passion, watch until the end. You won't regret it. Subscribe to this channel and comment where you're listening from. Let's continue. If this story has interested you, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us from which city you're watching us. We'll keep going. The sun was setting over the New Orleans area, painting the cobblestone streets and colonial facades of the city in golden hues. Lucy Ramirez gazed at the horizon from the terrace of the family bakery, Bread of the Soul, a business that for 3 generations had been the family's pride. Her fingers, stained with flour, nervously drummed on the railing as she recalled the words her grandmother Hope had told her that morning. "Today is the day, my dear. Today the Vargas family returns to New Orleans." The name Vargas stirred in Lucy a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Since childhood, she had heard stories about the rivalry between the Ramirez and Vargas families, 2 culinary dynasties that once competed for the recognition of having the best bakery in all of New Orleans. 20 years ago, the Vargas family left the city after a mysterious incident that no one wanted to discuss. Now, according to rumors circulating in the Central Market, they were returning to reclaim their old property and reopen the Wheat Crown right across from Bread of the Soul. "Are you worried about ghosts from the past?" Her brother Michael's voice startled her. "They're not ghosts if they're alive and coming to challenge us," Lucy replied, turning to face her brother. At 25, Michael had inherited his father's iron determination. "Dad is furious. He says he'll never forgive Gabriel Vargas for what he did. Dad is stuck in old feuds. We should focus on modernizing the bakery, not fighting battles from another generation." Lucy nodded, but deep down she felt that the Vargas family's arrival would change everything. She was not mistaken. The next morning, the aroma of freshly baked bread mingled with the perfume of garden flowers as Lucy opened the doors of Bread of the Soul to welcome the first customers. Mrs. Teresa, who had bought vanilla conchas every morning for decades, entered agitated. "Lucy, do you know already? The Vargas family is unloading new equipment in the shop across the street, and their eldest son is directing everything." Lucy's heart skipped a beat. Her curiosity outweighed her caution. She left Carmela, the trusted assistant, in charge and discreetly crossed the square to observe the activity at the Wheat Crown. The building, which had been abandoned for years, was now bustling with activity. Workers went in and out carrying construction materials, and amidst all the chaos, a young man gave instructions with authority. Tall, broad-shouldered, and with coal-black hair, there was something about his presence that immediately caught Lucy's attention. As if he had felt her gaze, the man slowly turned until his eyes met hers. Lucy felt an electric current run down her spine. He smiled, a smile that combined arrogance and warmth in equal measure, and began to walk towards her. "Good morning," he said with a deep, melodious voice. "Have you come to welcome me to the neighborhood?" Lucy lifted her chin, aware that she was facing the heir of the rival family. "I am Lucy Ramirez. My family has maintained the baking tradition of this neighborhood for generations." The man's face subtly changed. A flash of recognition crossed his eyes. "Diego Vargas," he introduced himself, extending a hand that Lucy did not take. "It seems our families have history." "A history we'd prefer not to relive," she replied firmly. "The past is the past, Lucy. I'm here to build a future. And I assure you that the Wheat Crown will once again be the most acclaimed bakery in New Orleans." The declaration, said without malice but with absolute conviction, ignited a competitive spark in Lucy. "May the best bread win," she retorted, turning on her heels to return to her business. Over the next few weeks, New Orleans witnessed a transformation in the old building of the Wheat Crown. The Vargas family spared no expense to modernize the bakery, installing state-of-the-art ovens while preserving the historic facade. Despite Lucy's efforts to remain indifferent, she couldn't help but observe the progress from her terrace every night. Meanwhile, tensions in the Ramirez family grew. Salvador, Lucy, and Michael's father insisted on intensifying production and lowering prices to compete, while Grandmother Hope advocated for maintaining the artisanal quality that had always distinguished them. "We can't compete with their machines, but they will never have our recipes," Hope declared one night during family dinner. Some things cannot be replicated with technology, but with the heart. It was then that Lucy had an idea. If bread of the soul couldn't compete with modernity, it had to stand out for its authenticity. She began researching ancient recipes from the region, traditional breads almost forgotten that represented the true essence of New Orleans. One afternoon, while searching through her grandmother's old trunk for historical bakery documents, she found a yellowed notebook with worn leather covers. Opening it, she discovered it was a handwritten recipe book with a dedication that left her breathless. For Hope Ramirez, with all my love, may these secrets always remain between us. Gabriel Vargas. Lucy looked at the date, 1980, 5 years before her birth and 15 years before the Vargas family left New Orleans. Had her grandmother and Gabriel Vargas been close? What kind of secrets did they share? Before she could investigate further, she heard her grandmother's voice calling her. "Did you find what you were looking for, my dear?" Hope asked, appearing in the doorway of the room. Lucy quickly closed the notebook. "Yes, Grandma. Just some old recipes." The old woman looked at the book in her granddaughter's hands and paled slightly. "That notebook. I didn't know it still existed." "Did you know Gabriel Vargas well?" Lucy asked directly. Hope sighed deeply and entered the room, closing the door behind her. "There are things from the past that are best left undisturbed, Lucy. But Grandma, if there's any secret that can help us understand this rivalry—" "It's not that simple," Hope interrupted, sitting heavily in a nearby chair. "The Ramirez and Vargas families weren't always enemies. There was a time when they were allies, even more than that." Her eyes lost themselves in distant memories. "Gabriel and we were more than friends." The revelation hit Lucy like a shockwave. "You two—" "We were in love," Hope confessed with a mix of nostalgia and pain in her voice. "We were going to get married, to unite the bakeries. But then the incident with the secret recipe happened, and our families were divided forever." Before Lucy could ask more, they heard approaching footsteps. Michael appeared at the door, his face tense. "Lucy, they're looking for you downstairs," he announced with evident displeasure. "It's Diego Vargas. He says he has a proposal for you." With a racing heart and 1,000 unanswered questions about the past, Lucy went downstairs to meet Diego. The Vargas heir stood in the main living room, observing the family photographs on the wall. Seeing her, he smiled in a way that Lucy found inexplicably unsettling. "Lucy Ramirez," Diego said, "I have come to propose something that could change the destiny of our families forever." The Ramirez family living room seemed to shrink with Diego Vargas's presence. Lucy watched him closely as he awaited her response. His confident posture, the way his eyes scanned the room, evaluating every detail, the way he held an old framed photograph between his fingers, where both families appeared, decades ago, smiling in front of a food festival. "What kind of proposal could interest me?" Lucy asked, crossing her arms. "Our families haven't spoken in decades." Diego carefully placed the photograph back. "Precisely why I'm here. I've come to propose a truce." Michael, who had remained in the doorway, let out a dry laugh. "A truce? After what your father did?" "Michael," Lucy warned sternly. Then she turned to Diego. "My brother is right to be suspicious. The Vargas family left without explanation, and now they return as if nothing happened." Diego took a deep breath. "I understand your skepticism, but I've been investigating the past, Lucy. The real reason our families drifted apart isn't what you've been told. And according to you, what's the truth?" Lucy asked, feeling a chill as she remembered the notebook she had just discovered. "That's what I want to find out," he replied, taking a step closer. "And I think we could do it together. In 2 weeks, the city government is organizing the New Orleans Bread Festival. My proposal is simple. Let's participate together, uniting the traditional techniques of the Ramirezes with the innovations of the Vargas." The proposal was so unexpected that it left Lucy speechless. Michael, however, was quick to react. "Share our recipes with you? Dream on." Diego kept his gaze fixed on Lucy. "I'm not talking about revealing family secrets. Each would keep the essence of their processes. But together, we could create something new, something that honors the true history of our families." Before the break, Lucy felt tempted to mention the notebook, to ask about the relationship between her grandmother and Gabriel Vargas, but something stopped her. She needed to know more before revealing what she had discovered. "Why would you do this?" The wheat crown is almost ready to open. You could compete directly against us. I could, Diego conceded, but I haven't returned to New Orleans to continue a senseless war. I've returned to understand, and I think you also want answers, Lucy. There was something in the way he pronounced her name that gave her a tingle at the back of her neck. How could this man, practically a stranger, read her thoughts so well? I need to think about it, she finally replied, and consult with my family. Diego nodded, pulling a card from his jacket pocket. My personal number. When you decide, call me directly. After his departure, the Ramirez house became a verbal battlefield. Salvador, furious, was adamantly opposed to any collaboration with the Vargas. Michael wavered between distrust and curiosity about commercial possibilities. And Hope maintained a worrying silence, her eyes fixed on the horizon as her wrinkled hands clutched an embroidered handkerchief. "Grandma," Lucy said to her that night when they were finally alone in the kitchen, "what really happened between you and the Vargas family? What about the incident with the secret recipe you mentioned?" Hope seemed to age 10 years in an instant. It was the most special bread of the dead that New Orleans had ever tasted, a recipe that Gabriel and I created together, combining traditions from both families. We were going to present it as a symbol of our union. Her voice broke. But someone stole the recipe. Your grandfather accused Gabriel, and the Vargas family accused us. We never knew the truth. What if someone else was the culprit? What if this whole rivalry is based on a misunderstanding? That no longer matters, my dear. The damage is done. Gabriel married another woman. I married your grandfather. Our lives went separate ways. But, Grandma, if we could find out what really happened. Some wounds are too deep, Lucy. Be careful with the Vargas family, especially with Diego. He's identical to his father at his age. And Vargas men have a knack for charming Ramirez women. Despite the warnings, or perhaps motivated by them, Lucy couldn't stop thinking about Diego's proposal. That night, she carefully reviewed the found notebook. In addition to recipes, it contained personal notes, fragments of conversations, and on the last pages, a sketch for a logo that combined the symbols of both bakeries, a wheat crown intertwined with a heart, the soul of the bread. 3 days later, Lucy made a decision. She called Diego and they agreed to meet in a neutral place, the City Park Botanical Garden, away from curious eyes and sharp tongues. The garden, with its collection of native Louisiana plants, offered a tranquil refuge in the middle of the city. Lucy arrived first and waited by an ancient live oak tree. When she saw Diego approaching, her heart treacherously quickened its pace. "You've decided to accept," he said by way of greeting, more an affirmation than a question. "With conditions," she replied. "We'll work together for the festival, but I want to know the truth about what happened between our families. All of it." Diego smiled, and the sun, filtering through the leaves, drew golden patterns on his face. "I was hoping you'd say that. I have questions too, Lucy. My father never talks about the past, but before he died—" "Your father died," Lucy interrupted, surprised. No, Diego quickly clarified. "My mother, 2 years ago, on her deathbed, she handed me a box of letters and made me promise to return to New Orleans to correct the error. She never explained what she meant." Lucy felt the pieces starting to fit together. "I found a notebook," she confessed. "It belonged to my grandmother. It has recipes written by your father, and it seems they had a close relationship." Diego didn't seem surprised. "I suspected something like that. Among my mother's letters are several that mention an H whom my father couldn't forget." They looked at each other in silence, two descendants of feuding families, united by the search for a truth buried for decades. "What exactly do you propose?" Lucy finally asked. "Let's work together for the festival. Use that time to investigate the past, and if we discover the truth, perhaps we can finally heal this division." Lucy extended her hand. "Deal." When their fingers touched, neither of them was prepared for the current of energy that seemed to flow between them. They quickly let go, but the echo of that sensation lingered. "We'll start tomorrow," Lucy said, trying to maintain a professional tone. "You can come to Bread of the Soul after closing. We'll avoid curious onlookers." The following days transformed both their lives. Every night, after the bakeries closed, they met alternately in the workshops of both businesses to experiment with recipes. In public, they maintained the appearance of a polite rivalry, but in private, amidst the aroma of freshly baked bread and flour dust, a complicity that neither had anticipated was born. Diego proved to be an innovative baker, combining modern techniques with a deep respect for tradition. Lucy, for her part, possessed an almost mystical knowledge of New Orleans' indigenous flavors and the behavior of naturally fermented doughs. "This craft whiskey will give the bread a unique touch," she explained one night, as they kneaded together what they hoped would be their masterful creation for the festival. "It's a special distillation that is only produced in a nearby bayou community during the full moon." "My father mentioned that whiskey," Diego recalled, his hands rhythmically working the dough alongside hers. "He said it was the only one capable of capturing the true spirit of New Orleans." Their hands brushed under the dough, and this time neither pulled away immediately. They looked up simultaneously, their faces inches apart, covered by a fine layer of flour that failed to hide the blush that colored their cheeks. "We should," Lucy began. "Yes, the baking," Diego completed, pulling away first. That night, as they baked their experimental creation, Lucy watched Diego when he thought she wasn't looking. There was something familiar about him, as if she had known him in another life. Perhaps it was simply the echo of their family's history, or perhaps something deeper, more inexplicable. The bread they created that night was extraordinary, a perfect combination of the traditional Ramirez techniques with the modern Vargas precision. They called it bread of reconciliation, though only between themselves. As the festival approached, so did their investigation into the past. Each contributed fragments of information. Diego with his mother's letters, Lucy with the notebook and her grandmother's stories. Little by little, the image of the past began to take shape, although crucial pieces of the puzzle were still missing. One afternoon, while reviewing old photographs in the municipal archive, they discovered something unexpected. A photograph of the 1995 competition, the last one in which both families participated together before the break. In the image, slightly out of focus in the background, a familiar figure appeared leaning over the table where the famous bread of the dead was displayed. "That's," Diego murmured, pointing to the man. "Anthony Fuentes," Lucy completed. "My father's godfather. He was always like an uncle to our family. He was also close to the Vargas family. In fact, he was the one who introduced my parents after my grandmother and your father separated," Lucy concluded, feeling an important piece fall into place. They looked at each other, the same suspicion growing in their minds. "What if it was him?" Lucy whispered. "What if Anthony stole the recipe and let our families blame each other?" "We need proof," Diego replied, his face darkening. "Do you know where he lives now?" "In Savannah. He moved there about 10 years ago and opened his own bakery." Lucy paused, considering the implications. "If it really was him, do you think he would use the stolen recipe?" "There's only one way to find out." The trip to Savannah wasn't easy to organize. Both had responsibilities at their respective bakeries, and the festival was inexorably approaching. They finally agreed to leave on a Sunday, the only day Bread of the Soul and the Wheat Crown remained closed. Lucy invented an excursion to a special ingredients market to justify her absence to her family, while Diego simply said he needed a day to himself. Dawn was barely breaking when the bus departed from the New Orleans terminal. Sitting next to each other, both maintained a comfortable silence as the landscape gradually transformed, the rugged mountains giving way to wide valleys as they headed towards Savannah. "Are you nervous?" Diego finally asked, observing Lucy fiddling with the pendant hanging from her neck, a small silver bread that had belonged to her grandmother. "More like anxious," she replied. "If Anthony really was responsible for separating our families, what will we do? Confront him directly?" Diego shook his head. "First, we need to confirm our suspicions. Taste his bread of the dead. Compare it with the recipes we know. If he really stole our grandparents' formula, there will be unmistakable elements. And if we're right, what then? The damage is already done, Diego. decades of resentment aren't erased with an apology. He impulsively took her hand. But we can try to build a new future if our families knew the truth. Lucy looked at their joined hands and then into Diego's eyes. There was an intensity in them that disarmed her. Slowly, she withdrew her hand. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. First things first. Savannah greeted them with its colonial splendor, its cobblestone streets and facades covered in intricate tiles. Fuentes Bakery was located on a prime corner near the city square, an elegant establishment with impeccable display cases exhibiting creations that blended European techniques with American Southern flavors. Anthony was always ambitious, Lucy commented, as they observed the premises from the opposite. Sidewalk. Look at the size of that place. It must have cost a fortune. Crime pays, apparently, Diego murmured with bitterness. They mingled with the customers who continuously entered and exited. The interior was even more impressive. High ceilings, marble counters, and an intoxicating aroma of butter and spices. Although it wasn't Day of the Dead season, a sign announced that their legendary bread of the dead was available year-round by popular demand. Bingo, Diego whispered. They bought a piece of the famous bread and other products so as not to arouse suspicion. While paying, Lucy scrutinized the place looking for Anthony, but only young employees were attending. When she casually asked about the owner, she was informed that Mr. Fuentes was traveling, but would return for a special demonstration that same afternoon. Perfect timing, Diego commented once outside. Do you want to try this now or wait for the demonstration? They decided to find a nearby park to examine their purchase. The bread of the dead was visually impressive, perfectly rounded, with decorations simulating crossed bones and a peculiar orange-tinged sugar dusting. As they broke it, the aroma instantly transported them to their childhood. Lucy closed her eyes, inhaling deeply. Orange blossom and anise, she murmured. And something else, Diego added, examining the crumb. That yellowish tint? It's exactly how my father described the original recipe. Lucy took a piece and tasted it slowly, savoring every nuance. It's almost identical to what my grandmother described, but there's something different. As if a key ingredient is missing, or as if someone stole the recipe without fully understanding all its secrets, Diego completed. Their gazes met, the confirmation of their suspicions floating between them like a palpable certainty. We have to talk to him, Lucy decided. Confront him with what we know. What if he denies everything? We don't have concrete proof, only coincidences and similar flavors. Lucy reflected for a moment. The demonstration. If we go as aspiring bakers, interested in learning, maybe he'll reveal something without realizing it. The demonstration was scheduled for 5 in the afternoon. They registered as a couple of entrepreneurs from New York City, interested in opening their own bakery. The workshop would take place in the back of the establishment, where Anthony Fuentes had a special workshop for educational events. As the hour approached, Lucy felt her nervousness grow. This man, whom she had considered part of her family for years, could be responsible for the bitter division between the Ramirezes and the Vargas. How would she face that betrayal? Diego seemed to read her thoughts. As they waited among other participants, he discreetly took her hand and squeezed it gently. "We're in this together," he murmured. The warmth of his palm against hers instilled a strange calm. Anthony Fuentes made his entrance with the grandiosity of a movie star. In his late 60s, he maintained a distinguished bearing and a powerful voice that filled the room. Lucy studied his face, searching for traces of the man who used to visit her home during her childhood, always bringing some sweet treat or toy. "Bread is not just food," Anthony began his speech as he donned an immaculately white apron. "It is history, it is culture, it is the soul of a people expressed in flour and fire." Diego and Lucy exchanged a look. The words were practically identical to those Grandmother Hope used to repeat. The demonstration progressed with Anthony explaining each step of his original creation, as he called it. To two experts like Diego and Lucy, it was painfully obvious that the recipe was a variation of the one their grandparents had developed together. The gestures, the timings, even the kneading method bore the unmistakable imprint of the Ramirezes and the Vargas. "The secret," Anthony proclaimed at a certain point, "lies in the balance between orange blossom water and a touch of aged craft whiskey that practically no one uses in baking. Lucy felt Diego tense beside her. That specific detail appeared in her grandmother's notebook, an innovation that she and Gabriel had secretly tested. When it was time for questions, Diego raised his hand with apparent innocence. "Mr. Fuentes, this technique is fascinating. How did you come to develop it? Were you inspired by any particular tradition?" Anthony smiled with poorly disguised pride. "Creativity, young man, comes from observation and experimentation. I spent years studying baking traditions from all over the South." "It's curious," Diego insisted, "because it reminds me a lot of a style I saw in New Orleans, specifically from two traditional families, the Ramirezes and the Vargas." The change in Anthony's expression was subtle but undeniable. A flash of alarm crossed his gaze before he recomposed himself. "Ah, yes, I know those bakeries. Good artisans, no doubt, though a bit limited in their vision." Lucy couldn't hold back any longer. "Limited enough not to notice someone stealing their ideas, Mr. Fuentes?" Silence fell heavily over the room. The other participants looked confused by the sudden tension. Anthony narrowed his eyes, evaluating the couple with new attention. "I think you're confusing me with someone else," he finally said, his voice losing its warmth. "Who are you, really?" Diego stepped forward. "I am Diego Vargas, son of Gabriel Vargas, and she is Lucy Ramirez, granddaughter of Hope." Color drained from Anthony's face. With an abrupt gesture, he indicated to the rest of the participants that the demonstration had concluded for technical reasons and offered a full refund. When the room emptied, the three stood face to face, the air charged with decades of secrets and lies. "So this day has finally come," Anthony murmured, suddenly aged. "I always knew the truth would eventually come out." "Why did you do it?" Lucy asked directly. "You were a friend to both families. How could you betray them like that?" Anthony removed his apron with tired movements and sat on a high stool. "It wasn't like you think. I never meant to cause a permanent break. So you admit you stole the recipe?" Diego pressed. "I borrowed it," Anthony corrected with a flash of his old arrogance, "for an important competition in New York City. I just needed to win that recognition, establish my name. I was going to confess eventually to share the success." "But you let our families blame each other," Lucy accused, indignation growing within her. Anthony looked away. "It was convenient. By the time I wanted to clarify things, the rift between the Ramirezes and the Vargas was too deep. Gabriel had already married Mariana, scorned by Hope's supposed betrayal, and your grandmother, Lucy, had agreed to marry Roderick Ramirez. You destroyed 2 lives for ambition," Diego summarized, his voice trembling with contained anger. "It wasn't just them," Anthony exclaimed, hitting the table with his fist. "Do you think I haven't paid for my mistakes? I've lived with this guilt for decades. Every piece of bread I've baked has reminded me of my betrayal." "And why didn't you confess later?" Lucy asked. "You could have repaired some of the damage." Anthony laughed humorlessly. "After Gabriel threatened never to speak to me again? After your grandfather swore he would destroy me if I came near his family. The pride of both families was too strong." He paused, studying the couple in front of him. "Though I see something has changed in the new generation." Diego and Lucy exchanged an uncomfortable glance, suddenly aware of how much they had begun to care for each other in such a short time. "We have to tell our families," Lucy finally said. "They deserve to know the truth." Anthony nodded slowly. "Yes, I suppose it's time. I'll give you something that might help." He rose with effort and walked towards a small office attached to the workshop. He returned with a carved wooden box. The original recipe, the true one, with all the notes that Gabriel and Hope wrote together. "I never had the courage to use it completely. It always lacked that final ingredient that only they knew." Diego took the box with reverence. "Will you come with us to New Orleans to explain everything in person?" Anthony visibly hesitated. "I don't know if I'm ready to face Gabriel and Hope after so long." "You have to," Lucy insisted. "It's the only way to truly close this story." As they returned to New Orleans that same night on a half-empty bus, Diego and Lucy held the box like a treasure between them. The discovery had changed something fundamental in their relationship. They were no longer just 2 young people investigating their family's past. Now they were bearers of a truth that could heal old wounds, or reopen them. "Do you think our families can forgive?" Lucy asked, her head resting against the window glass. watching the distant lights of towns appearing and disappearing in the darkness. Diego contemplated their hands intertwined over the wooden box. "I don't know. Pride can be stronger than truth. My grandmother never stopped loving your father," Lucy confessed softly. "I see it in her eyes every time someone mentions the Vargas, and my father keeps a photograph of her in his study. I thought she was a distant cousin until I found the letters." The silence between them was filled with unspoken possibilities, with questions about destiny and the patterns that repeat across generations. "If they had known the truth," Lucy began. "We would have grown up as family," Diego completed. "Perhaps as cousins, or we never would have met like this," she concluded, daring to look directly into his eyes. The bus moved through the night as they remained lost in thought, aware that the next day they would face their families with a truth that would change everything, and also aware that regardless of the outcome, something had been born between them that they could no longer ignore. Anthony Fuentes would follow them on the next bus. He had asked for a few hours to close his business and mentally prepare for the encounter. He promised to be in New Orleans by noon the next day. Just in time for the meeting, they agreed to organize on neutral ground, the City Park Botanical Garden, where Lucy and Diego had sealed their pact of collaboration. "How do you think your father will react?" Lucy asked as the bus entered the New Orleans terminal, dawn barely hinting on the horizon. Diego smiled with a touch of sadness. "My father is a man of intense but contained emotions. He could explode with anger or remain completely silent. What worries me most is whether he can forgive, not Anthony, but himself for having doubted your grandmother. And my family will have to accept that they unfairly blamed yours for decades." As they disembarked from the bus, with the box firmly held under Diego's arm, both felt the weight of the responsibility they had taken on. They were about to rewrite their family's history, to challenge narratives rooted for generations. "I'll see you in a few hours," Diego said when it was time to part. Impulsively, he leaned in and kissed Lucy's cheek. "Whatever happens today, remember that we found the truth together." She nodded, not trusting her voice to respond. As she watched him walk away, she brought her hand to her cheek where she could still feel the warmth of his lips, wondering if the truth would be enough to change not only the past, but also their future. The midday sun beat down relentlessly on the City Park Botanical Garden when Lucy arrived, 15 minutes before the agreed time. She had slept only a few hours, too agitated by the discoveries and the impending confrontation. Her family had noticed her nervousness during breakfast, but she evaded questions, citing anxiety about the upcoming festival. Only to her grandmother Hope had she told the truth, or at least part of it. "Grandma, today you will discover something important about the past, something that could change the way you see the last 30 years. The old woman had looked at her with eyes that seemed to pierce through time. "It's about Gabriel, isn't it? I always knew this day would come." Now, as she nervously walked the garden paths, Lucy wondered if she had done the right thing by organizing this meeting. What if she only succeeded in reopening old wounds? What if forgiveness proved impossible after so long? "You're early," Diego's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find him walking towards her, as impeccable as ever despite the evident fatigue on his face. "I couldn't stay home pretending normalcy," she confessed. He nodded, understanding perfectly. "My father suspects something. This morning he asked me directly why I've been meeting with you." "And what did you tell him?" "Why do you say I'm now with the truth? That we're investigating the past." Diego gave a tense smile. He seemed relieved, which struck me as strange. As if deep down he had been waiting for someone to unravel this mystery. They chose a secluded corner of the garden, under a huge live oak tree whose branches offered generous shade. They arranged several chairs in a semicircle and placed the wooden box Anthony had given them on a small table. The families arrived separately. First the Ramirezes, Salvador serious and distrustful, Michael visibly uncomfortable, and Grandmother Hope serene, but with an expectant glint in her eyes. Minutes later, Gabriel Vargas appeared. As imposing as Diego, but with silver hair and lines of experience marking his face, accompanied by Rafael, Diego's younger brother. The silence that followed the curt greetings was laden with decades of resentment. Lucy and Diego stood like mediators between two worlds that were once united. "Thank you for coming," Diego began. I know this is difficult for everyone, but what we discovered is too important to keep. What is all this about? Salvador asked impatiently. Why this sudden interest in reviving old stories? Because the stories we know aren't true, Lucy replied firmly. We have discovered who really stole the bread of the dead recipe that Grandmother Hope and Mr. Gabriel created together. A murmur ran through both groups. Gabriel Vargas, who had remained silent, stepped forward. His gaze briefly met Hope's before he addressed the young people. Who? He simply asked, his deep voice resonating with authority. Before they could answer, a figure appeared on the path. Anthony Fuentes advanced slowly, the weight of years and secrets evident in every step. Seeing him, expressions of surprise gave way to recognition and then to confusion. Anthony. Gabriel was the first to speak. What are you doing here? Anthony stopped in front of the group, his eyes moving nervously between the faces watching him. I've come to confess, he finally said, his voice brittle. After 30 years, I've come to tell the truth. What followed was an hour of painful revelations. Anthony narrated how he had seen the recipe while helping with preparations for the competition, how ambition blinded him, how he took advantage of mutual suspicions to escape with his secret. He spoke of the success that stolen recipe brought him and the guilt that never left him. You blamed each other, and I just let it happen, he concluded, shame evident in every word. The silence that followed was dense, almost palpable. Finally, Salvador Ramirez stood up abruptly. You expect us to believe this? After 30 years? You conveniently appear now that our children are fraternizing with the enemy. There's no enemy, Dad, Lucy intervened. There never was. There was only a thief and two families who loved each other. Gabriel Vargas remained strangely silent, his gaze fixed on Hope, who returned his gaze with equal intensity. The box, Diego finally said, lifting the wooden object. Anthony gave us this. These are the original notes written by both of you. He looked at his father and Hope. The secret ingredient, the one you never revealed to anyone. It's here. He opened the box with reverence. Inside, yellowed by time but perfectly preserved, were dozens of papers with annotations, drawings of breads, calculations of proportions, and a small cloth bag with something inside. Dehydrated and ground marigold petals, Hope murmured, immediately recognizing the content. Cultivated specifically for the bread, following the lunar cycle. The soul of the bread of the dead, Gabriel completed, his voice strangely soft. No one else knew that detail. Anthony nodded. That's why my version was never perfect. I copied everything I could see but that ingredient, that secret you took with you. Gabriel slowly approached the box, his fingers caressing the papers with nostalgia. I thought I had lost everything, he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Hope stood up with some difficulty and also approached. I kept our notebook, she confessed. I could never get rid of it. Their hands brushed over the papers, and for a moment time seemed to rewind, returning them to that era when two young bakers dreamed of uniting their lives and their legacies. Why did you never look for me? Hope asked in a low voice. When things calmed down, Gabriel sighed deeply. Pride, I suppose. And then you married Roderick. You started a family. I did the same. Life took its course. Raphael, visibly uncomfortable with the situation, cleared his throat. So our entire family rivalry was based on a misunderstanding. Decades of hostility over a lie. The best tragedies are always built on misunderstandings, Michael commented with bitter irony. Salvador, who had listened to everything in silence, finally addressed Anthony. You were my godfather. I trusted you my whole life. Anthony lowered his gaze. I know. I don't expect forgiveness, Salvador. I just wanted you to finally know the truth. An uncomfortable silence descended upon the group. Decades of resentment could not dissolve in an hour of confessions. Lucy and Diego exchanged glances, aware that they had started a process that would take time. What do we do now? Raphael finally asked, voicing the question everyone had in mind. It was Hope who responded with the wisdom of her years. Now we have a choice. We can cling to the past, to what we lost and who to blame, or we can look forward. She paused, looking meaningfully at Lucy and Diego. Some have already started building bridges. Gabriel nodded slowly. The festival, he said suddenly. Our children have been working together for the bread festival. A bread of reconciliation, Diego confirmed. combining the best of both family traditions. As it should have been from the beginning, Hope murmured. The meeting concluded without grand declarations of immediate forgiveness or reconciliation. The wounds were too deep, the habits of resentment too ingrained. But something had fundamentally changed. The truth, however painful, had finally been revealed. Anthony bid farewell with a promise to return for the festival. "I've lived with this guilt too long," he said. "Perhaps participating in the reconciliation will help me find some peace." The families separated into different groups, each needing time to process what had happened. Lucy and Diego remained in the garden, gathering the papers and carefully putting them back in the box. "Do you think it will work?" she asked when they were alone. "Can they forgive after so long?" Diego contemplated the path where their families had disappeared. "I don't know. But at least now they know the truth. It's a start." They looked at each other in silence, aware that their own story was just beginning. What did they mean to each other now? Were they allies in a mission accomplished? Friends united by extraordinary circumstances? Or was something deeper growing between them? "We should focus on the festival," Lucy suggested, avoiding the unasked question that hung between them. "Only 5 days left." Diego nodded, though his eyes said much more than his words expressed. "I'll see you tonight at my bakery. We need to perfect our creation." That night, as they worked in the Wheat Crown bakery, the dynamic between them had subtly changed. There was a new awareness, a sweet and expectant tension that electrified the air every time their hands brushed while kneading. "Did you know that ancient bakers believed that bread absorbed the emotions of whoever kneaded it?" Diego commented as he watched Lucy work the dough with precise and elegant movements. "My grandmother always says that bread kneaded with love tastes different," she replied, smiling. "That's why she never allowed anyone to bake angry." "Then our bread of reconciliation should contain hope," he said, moving closer until he was beside her. "And perhaps something more." Their gazes met over the dough, and this time neither tried to hide what they felt. Diego raised a hand to brush a lock of hair from Lucy's face, leaving a slight mark of flour on her cheek. The gesture, so intimate and natural, broke the last barrier between them. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Just 2 weeks ago we were enemies." "We were never enemies," he responded. "We were just two people caught in a story that didn't belong to us." When their lips finally met, she knew she was sealing a destiny that had perhaps been written since before her birth. As if the interrupted lives of Gabriel and Hope sought continuity through them, the kiss tasted of flower and promises, of revealed secrets and new possibilities. When they separated, both smiled, aware that they had crossed a threshold with no turning back. "Now our bread will truly have a special flavor," Diego joked, returning to the dough with renewed enthusiasm. The following days passed in a whirlwind of preparations for the festival, tense but progressively more cordial family meetings, and stolen moments between Lucy and Diego, exploring this new territory between them. News of their relationship spread quickly among both families, causing mixed reactions. Salvador expressed his disapproval, though without the vehemence Lucy feared. Michael was surprisingly understanding, confessing that he had always thought the rivalry was stupid. Raphael joked about having missed the opportunity to fall in love with Sophia, Lucy's younger sister, to complete the family reconciliation. But it was Gabriel and Hope who reacted most significantly. One afternoon, while Lucy and Diego were working at Bread of the Soul, they found them watching from the bakery door, their faces reflecting a mix of nostalgia, regret, and hope. "That's exactly how we used to work," Gabriel commented, his voice laden with emotion. "The same rhythm, the same synchronicity." "As if they were born to bake together," Hope added. The young people paused, aware of the weight of those words, of the echo of the past resonating in the present. "Perhaps we should try that recipe," Gabriel suggested after a moment of silence. "The original, for the festival." "The bread of the dead?" Diego asked, surprised. "No, son. I mean the bread of unity that Hope and I created before everything else. The one that was going to symbolize the union of our families." Hope nodded, her eyes bright. "We never got to bake it for the public. It remained only in our sketches and tests." "It's in the box Anthony gave us," Lucy confirmed. "The complete notes." "Then perhaps it's time," Gabriel said. "A bread of unity baked by 4 Ramirez hands and 4 Vargas hands." The proposal hung in the air like a promise, a possibility of closing a circle that had remained open for too long. And as Gabriel and Hope walked away together, conversing softly about almost forgotten recipes and techniques, Diego took Lucy's hand. "It seems we're not the only ones building bridges," he commented. Lucy watched the two elders, wondering if lost time could ever be recovered. Her feelings buried for decades could bloom again. And then she looked at Diego, silently grateful that they didn't have to wait 30 years to discover what they felt for each other. The festival was inexorably approaching, and with it, the opportunity to rewrite not only the history of their families, but the future of all of them. The eve of the New Orleans Bread Festival brought a frenzy of activity to both bakeries. For the first time in 3 decades, Bread of the Soul and the Wheat Crown were preparing not as competitors, but as allies. The decision to jointly present the legendary Bread of Unity had generated a wave of rumors throughout the city. The residents of New Orleans, accustomed to the fierce rivalry between the Ramirez and Vargas families, watched with astonishment the continuous exchanges between both establishments, ingredients coming and going, meetings extending until dawn, and most surprisingly, the patriarchal figures of Gabriel and Hope walking together through the square, lost in conversations that seemed to transport them back to their youth. "Do you think they'll fall in love again?" Lucy asked Diego as they supervised the fermentation of the special sourdough they had prepared, following the instructions of the old recipe book. Diego watched through the window as his father and Hope together examined the marigolds in the market. "I don't know if it's possible to recover 30 lost years," he replied thoughtfully. "But there's something between them that never quite died." The communal workshop they had improvised in a neutral space, seeded by the municipality for the festival, was bustling with activity. The two families worked side by side, alternating moments of camaraderie with intervals of tension when old habits and suspicions surfaced. Salvador Ramirez, the most reluctant to reconcile, maintained a prudent distance, limiting himself to supervising the preparation of the traditional clay ovens they would use for the final bake. Michael and Raphael, on the other hand, had developed a surprising affinity, discovering common interests beyond baking. "It seems this family reunion was destined to happen," commented Isabella Cruz, Lucy's best friend, who had offered to help with the preparations. "Your grandmother seems to have rejuvenated 10 years since she started working with Mr. Gabriel." It was true. Hope moved with renewed energy, her eyes bright as she explained to the younger generation the ancient techniques they had perfected decades ago. Gabriel watched her with a mixture of admiration and regret, like someone contemplating a lost treasure that had miraculously returned to his hands. "The Bread of Unity is not just a recipe," Hope explained to a group of apprentices that had spontaneously formed. "It is a symbol of how different traditions can intertwine to create something new and beautiful. Like families," Gabriel added, exchanging a knowing look with her. "Or hearts?" Lucy couldn't help but blush at the comment, aware that Gabriel's words resonated with her own situation with Diego. Their relationship, blossomed amidst family secrets and painful revelations, had become the center of all conversations in New Orleans. The granddaughter of the Ramirezes and the son of the Vargas united like the doughs they kneaded together every night. The preparation of the Bread of Unity proved to be more complex than they had anticipated. According to the original notes, the dough had to ferment for 3 days following the lunar phases, gradually incorporating ingredients that symbolized unity. Amaranth from the central lowlands, chocolate from the coastal areas, cinnamon from the uplands, each element representing a region of Louisiana, each process a metaphor for how differences could harmonize. "This is more poetry than baking," Diego joked one night, as he and Lucy watched the dough during its second fermentation. The workshop was silent at that hour, illuminated only by the dim light of a couple of lamps. "No wonder our families fell in love through bread." "Bread has always been a language for us," Lucy replied, resting her head on his shoulder. "My grandmother says that each family has its own dialect, its unique way of expressing itself through dough and fire." Diego put his arm around her. "And we are creating our own dialect now. A dialect our grandparents can understand," she added, smiling. The silence that followed was charged with meaning, with unasked questions about their own future, about what would come after the festival. Would the bakeries remain separate entities? How would their relationship fit into the family legacy they were both destined to continue? Sometimes I wonder, Diego murmured, if we are reliving their story or writing our own. Perhaps both, Lucy replied after reflecting. We are continuing something that was interrupted, but in our own way. The eve of the festival brought an unexpected visitor. Anthony Fuentes returned to New Orleans as he had promised, carrying a small wooden chest. I've come to return something else, he announced, to the cautious gaze of both families gathered in the communal workshop. Something I took 30 years ago, and that should never have left New Orleans. From the chest he extracted an ancient bread mold, carved from mesquite wood, with intricate designs representing the fusion of traditional symbols with Christian elements. The original mold for the bread of unity, he explained. Gabriel carved it by hand for months. Hope gasped, bringing her hands to her face. I thought it was lost forever. Gabriel slowly approached, taking the mold in his hands with reverence. His fingers traced the carved contours, memories of endless nights working the wood while dreaming of a future with hope. You kept it all this time? He asked, his voice trembling. Anthony nodded, shame evident on his face. I couldn't get rid of it. It was too beautiful, too significant. But I never dared to use it. It would have been a desecration. The silence that followed was broken by Salvador, who had remained aloof from the preparations, observing the growing reconciliation with suspicion. A mold doesn't erase 30 years of damage, he said bitterly. My father died believing the Vargas family had betrayed us. My mother never got over the break with her old friends. You're right, Salvador, Anthony replied humbly. Nothing can erase the past, but perhaps we can honor those who are no longer with us by building a different future. Salvador looked around at his daughter and Diego, working side by side with the familiarity of those who have found their perfect complement. At his mother and Gabriel, whose faces reflected decades of contained feelings. At his brother Michael and Rafael Vargas, laughing together as they prepared the ovens. And finally at the old wooden mold that symbolized a union that never came to be. My father used to say, he began slowly, that the true art of baking isn't in following recipes, but in knowing the exact moment for everything. When to knead, when to let rest, when to shape, when to bake. He paused meaningfully. Perhaps this is the moment to bake what should have come out of the oven 30 years ago. Salvador's words, from the staunchest defender of family resentment, fell like a balm on the group. Hope approached her son and took his hands in hers. Your father would be proud, she said softly. He was always a fair man, even in his pain. Gabriel joined them, the wooden mold still in his hands. Would you allow me to use it tomorrow? To honor not only our shared past, but also those who are no longer with us. Salvador nodded gravely. For the Ramirez and Vargas families, those who were, those who are, and those who will be. The night advanced as they finalized the preparations. The bread of unity required meticulous preparation. The dough had to be given its final shape just before dawn and baked with the first rays of the sun. According to the original notes, this process symbolized rebirth, the opportunity to start anew with the light of a new day. As they worked, Gabriel and Hope shared stories of their youth, of how they had fallen in love while experimenting with recipes, of the dreams they had for their united bakeries. Lucy watched fascinated this window into the past, recognizing in the elders' complicity the reflection of her own connection with Diego. It's as if time has stopped for them, she commented to Diego when they were momentarily alone. As if these 30 years were just a parenthesis. Diego contemplated his father, whose eyes never left Hope as she explained the meaning of each symbol on the mold. Time didn't erase what they felt. It only buried it under layers of pride and misunderstandings. Do you think they could pick up where they left off? Lucy asked, aware of how improbable it sounded. Diego smiled with a touch of melancholy. I don't know. But perhaps it's not about recovering exactly what they lost, but about finding a new way to be together in the time they have left. As the night progressed, tiredness began to wear on the group. The younger ones insisted that Gabriel and Hope rest a few hours before the crucial moment of dawn. Surprisingly, both agreed without protest, recognizing the limits that age imposed on their bodies, though not on their spirits. We'll be back at dawn, Hope promised, for the most important moment. When the elders retired, accompanied by Salvador, who insisted on escorting his mother home, Lucy, Diego, Michael, Raphael, and Isabella continued with the preparations. The dough rested in perfect condition. The ovens were ready. Only the final touch remained, shaping the bread of unity using the ancient mold. Anthony, who had remained discreetly in the background, approached Lucy and Diego as they carefully measured the spices for the final touch. "I must confess something else," he said in a low voice, "something I didn't even mention to Gabriel and Hope." The young people exchanged an uneasy glance. "More secrets?" Diego asked with a hint of distrust. Anthony pulled a small dark glass vial from his pocket. "The final ingredient. The one I never managed to replicate because I never saw it written down anywhere." "What is it?" Lucy asked, intrigued. "Marigold dew," Anthony replied, "collected at dawn on the day of baking. When the flowers are open but the sun hasn't yet risen. Gabriel confessed it to me one night, after several glasses of craft whiskey, shortly before the break. He said it was the final secret, the one only Hope and he knew, the very essence of their union." Lucy took the vial with reverence. "You've kept it all these years?" Anthony shook his head. "I collected it this morning, in a marigold field on the outskirts of the city. I thought it had to be complete. The bread of unity deserves to have all its elements." Diego examined the vial against the light. The golden liquid shimmered with orange hues, as if it had captured the very essence of the sun. "How is it used?" "A few drops on the dough just before baking," Anthony explained. "Here's the last thing added, the element that connects all the parts." Lucy and Diego looked at each other, aware of the symbolic meaning of that moment, of that last revelation that completed the circle. "We'll tell Grandmother Hope and Mr. Gabriel when they return," Lucy decided. "They must decide whether to include it or not." The hours passed in a steady rhythm of preparations. Michael and Raphael took turns watching the ovens, keeping the fire at the exact point. Isabella organized the exhibition spaces where they would present the bread of unity, decorating them with flowers and traditional New Orleans elements. Lucy and Diego obsessively reviewed the original notes, determined that every detail would be perfect. "It's strange," Diego commented in a moment of calm as they observed the dough in its final rest. "In a way, we are reconstructing something that never truly came into existence. A bread that was never baked, a union that never materialized. But that always existed in potential," Lucy replied, "like a seed that never germinated but preserved its life for decades." At 4 in the morning, Gabriel and Hope returned, accompanied by Salvador and a growing group of curious early risers who, having heard the rumors, did not want to miss the historic event. The city began to awaken as the bread of unity took shape under expert hands. Gabriel and Hope directed the process with the authority of those who know every secret, every nuance of the art they had perfected throughout their lives. Lucy and Diego assisted, learning in real time a tradition that should have been transmitted naturally across generations. When Lucy showed Hope the vial of marigold dew, the old woman exchanged a meaningful look with Gabriel. "Our best-kept secret," she murmured. "How did you know?" Anthony stepped forward, taking responsibility. "Gabriel mentioned it to me once, many years ago. I thought you should have it to truly complete the recipe." Gabriel took the vial, his eyes welling up as he remembered. "Hope and I used to collect the dew together before dawn. We said we were capturing the very essence of the flower, its liquid soul." "The soul of the bread," Hope completed, smiling at the memory. Without further words, both elders uncorked the vial and, with a perfectly synchronized gesture that spoke of years of shared practice, sprinkled the golden drops onto the dough waiting in the carved mold. "Now," Gabriel announced, "we wait for the sun." The horizon began to tint pink and orange as they carefully moved the mold to the main oven, specially built for the occasion, according to ancient specifications. Anticipation grew among those present as Gabriel and Hope, assisted by Lucy and Diego, placed the dough in the exact position. And then, just as the first ray of sun pierced the New Orleans sky, the bread of unity entered the oven. A collective sigh swept through the audience, as if everyone intuitively understood that they were witnessing not just an act of baking, but a moment of historical reconciliation, the culmination of a circle that had remained open for 3 decades. As the bread baked, filling the air with its intoxicating aroma, Gabriel approached Hope, He took her hands in his, and with a voice laden with emotion, he spoke the words he had held for 30 years. "I never stopped loving you." Hope, not a single day. Time seemed to stand still in the communal workshop. Gabriel's words, spoken with the simplicity that only years and lost opportunities bestow, hung in the air like the aroma of the slowly baking bread. All those present held their breath, aware that they were witnessing a moment that transcended the personal to become part of the collective history of New Orleans. Hope looked at Gabriel, her moist eyes reflecting decades of stored feelings. "Me neither," she finally replied, her voice barely audible. "Not even when I tried to hate you." Salvador, who had observed the scene with an indecipherable expression, turned and left the workshop without a word. Lucy made to follow him, but Michael stopped her with a gesture. "Let him be," he murmured. "He needs time." So it's not easy for him to see that the entire family history he thought he knew was different. Meanwhile, news that the Ramirez and Vargas families were jointly baking the legendary bread of unity had spread like wildfire throughout New Orleans. A growing crowd gathered in the square in front of the venue, drawn as much by curiosity as by the delicious aroma emanating from the ovens. The festival would officially begin at 10 in the morning, but by the time the bread of unity was ready to be taken from the oven at 7, hundreds of people were already waiting to witness its presentation. "We didn't expect so many people so early," Raphael commented nervously, peering out the window. "It seems half the city has come." "News travels fast in New Orleans," Isabella replied, adjusting the final decorative touches. "Especially when it involves the two most famous baking families reconciling after 30 years. Diego and Lucy exchanged a knowing glance. Their personal story had been momentarily overshadowed by the larger drama of their grandparents, and in a way that provided a welcome respite from public attention. "Do you think it will work?" Lucy whispered, as she watched Hope and Gabriel prepare to remove the bread from the oven. "I mean the muss all of this." Diego intertwined his fingers with hers. "I don't know, but I think it has already worked better than we ever imagined." The crucial moment arrived with an almost ritual solemnity. Gabriel and Hope, clad in the traditional aprons of their respective bakeries, stood before the main oven. At a silent signal, perfectly coordinated as if the 30 years of separation had never existed, they opened the heavy iron door. The aroma that escaped from within was so intense, so extraordinarily complex, that several of those present let out exclamations of amazement. It was as if all the essences of New Orleans had concentrated into a single creation. Chocolate, cinnamon, amaranth, flowers, craft whiskey, each element distinguishable and yet perfectly integrated into a symphony of aromas. With precise movements, Gabriel extracted the enormous piece from the oven using a traditional wooden peel. The bread of unity emerged in all its splendor, a perfect circle of golden dough where the mold's designs had created reliefs that told a story of tradition and renewal. In the center, two intertwined symbols, a heart and a wheat crown, shone with a darker, almost reddish hue. "It's perfect," Hope murmured, her eyes bright with emotion. "Exactly as we dreamed it." Gabriel nodded, unable to speak, as he carefully placed the creation on a richly carved wooden base they had prepared for the occasion. Lucy noticed that her grandmother and Gabriel seemed to communicate without words, with the familiarity of those who have shared so much that words become superfluous. She wondered if she and Diego would ever reach that level of connection, or if they were already on their way to achieving it. The bread of unity was ceremoniously moved to the main square, where a special table awaited it, under a canopy decorated with marigolds and traditional New Orleans elements. The crowd respectfully parted to let the procession, led by the patriarchs of both families, pass. Murmurs of admiration spread like ripples in a pond when the creation was finally exposed to everyone's view. "Ramirez and Vargas united again," someone shouted from the crowd, triggering a spontaneous ovation that echoed throughout the square. Gabriel and Hope stood on either side of the bread, with Lucy and Diego flanking them. Michael, Raphael, and Isabella completed the picture, while Anthony remained discreetly in the background, as if he did not consider himself worthy of sharing that moment of triumph. The mayor of New Orleans, who had arrived hastily upon hearing of the event, took the floor to officially open the bread festival, although protocol dictated that the formal opening should not take place until 3 hours later. Some occasions transcend schedules and formalities, he declared with a smile. And the return of the legendary Bread of Unity to New Orleans is definitely one of them. As the mayor delivered his speech, Lucy searched for her father in the crowd. She finally located him, standing apart but watching intently. His expression was no longer one of rejection, but of resignation mixed with something that could be interpreted as acceptance. "You should go to him," Diego whispered to her, having followed her gaze. "This moment belongs to him too, even if he's not ready to admit it." Lucy nodded and discreetly separated from the main group to approach Salvador. Her father greeted her with a grave but not hostile gesture. "It's impressive," he acknowledged, gesturing with a nod towards the Bread of Unity, exactly as my mother described it in her stories. "It's our legacy, Dad," Lucy replied softly. "Of all of us, the Ramirezes, the Vargas, they're not as different as we thought." Salvador watched his mother next to Gabriel, the evident connection between them, the shared history that seemed to have survived 3 decades of separation. "I suppose it's never too late to correct mistakes," he finally murmured, "though some of us need more time than others to accept it. Will you join us?" Lucy asked hopefully. Salvador hesitated for a moment, but finally nodded. "For you, for your grandmother, for our family, all our families." Salvador and Lucy's return to the main group marked another small but significant step towards complete reconciliation. Gabriel extended his hand to Salvador, who after a moment of hesitation shook it firmly. "Your father would be proud," Gabriel said sincerely. "Roderick was always a fair man, even in the worst moments of our rivalry." "Perhaps fairer than all of us," Salvador admitted. "He was the only one who suggested years later that we should investigate what had really happened. But by then our pride was too great." The festival unfolded with extraordinary energy. The Bread of Unity held a place of honor in the center of the square, but both families had also prepared other specialties that they presented at their respective stalls. To everyone's surprise and delight, many of these creations incorporated elements from the other family. The Ramirezes had adopted Vargas fermentation techniques, while the Vargas had incorporated traditional ingredients that were a Ramirez specialty. "It's as if they never stopped influencing each other, even during the separation," Isabella commented to Lucy, as they watched visitors come and go between both stalls. "As if the connection had never truly been broken." Perhaps it wasn't broken, Lucy reflected. It just transformed into something different, something they couldn't recognize, but that was still there. In the mid-afternoon, when the festival was at its peak, something unexpected happened. An elegant woman in her 60s appeared in the square, accompanied by a young man who bore a striking resemblance to Diego. Her arrival caused an immediate commotion among the Vargas family. "It's my mother," Diego explained to Lucy, surprised. "And my cousin Javier. I didn't know they were coming." Mariana Vargas, Gabriel's wife, made her way through the crowd with dignity. Her face, still beautiful despite the years, showed a mixture of determination and vulnerability. She stopped in front of her husband and Hope, creating a triangle that captured the attention of everyone present. "Gabriel," she greeted in a serene voice. "Javier told me what was happening, so I thought I should be here." An uncomfortable silence descended upon the group. Mariana's presence added a new dimension to the family drama, a reminder that interrupted love stories left consequences that extended far beyond the original protagonists. To everyone's surprise, it was Hope who broke the silence, approaching Mariana with a warm smile. "I'm glad you came," she said sincerely. "This reconciliation wouldn't be complete without you." The visible tension in Mariana's shoulders seemed to dissolve slightly. "I've lived 30 years with the ghost of what you and Gabriel had," she confessed in a low but firm voice. "Today I wanted to see it with my own eyes, to finally understand. What Gabriel and I had belongs to the past," Hope replied softly. "What you built with him is as real and valuable as what we could have had. Perhaps more so because it has withstood the test of time." Gabriel watched the exchange with a moved expression. When Mariana turned to him, she seemed to have made a decision. "I haven't come to reclaim you or to interfere," she declared. "I've come to be part of this new chapter, if you'll allow me. Our family, all our families, have lived too long divided by secrets and misunderstandings. It was a moment of revelation for everyone present. Mariana's arrival, far from complicating the situation, seemed to complete a circle of reconciliation that went beyond what anyone had imagined. It was not just about healing the rift between two baking families, but about recognizing that the intricacies of human relationships were complex, imperfect, and yet capable of evolving into something new and valuable. As she watched the scene, Lucy felt Diego's hand seek hers. "Are you okay?" he asked in a low voice. "Better than okay," she replied. "I'm amazed. All these people have been carrying so much for so long, and now finally they can let it go. Thanks to us," Diego added, squeezing her hand, "to what we started without even knowing it." The culminating moment of the festival arrived when, following a New Orleans tradition, it was time to share the main bread with all attendees. Gabriel and Hope, assisted by their complete families, including Mariana, who had integrated with surprising naturalness, proceeded to carefully cut the bread of unity into portions that were distributed among those present. The first piece, however, was reserved for a special ritual. Gabriel took the ceremonial knife and, with expert precision, separated the central section where the symbols of the heart and the wheat crown intertwined. He divided this piece into two perfect halves, giving one to Hope and keeping the other for himself. "To what could have been," Gabriel said, raising his half, "and to what still can be," Hope completed, raising hers. They joined the pieces as if in a toast, and then each took a bite of their half. Their faces simultaneously lit up with an expression of recognition and astonishment. "Exactly as we imagined," Gabriel murmured, visibly emotional. "Perfectly balanced," Hope agreed. "As it should be." Lucy watched fascinated as her families, separated for so long by pride and misunderstandings, now merged in a celebration of what united them: bread, tradition, and finally, Anthony Fuentes timidly approached the group, as if still unsure of his place in this new configuration. "I would like to taste it too," he said humbly, "if you'll allow me." Gabriel and Hope exchanged a glance, and then, in a symbolic gesture of forgiveness, simultaneously offered him small pieces of their respective portions. Anthony received them with trembling hands and joined them before tasting, closing his eyes as he savored. "It's extraordinary," he acknowledged with a broken voice. "Much more than I ever managed to recreate. I had the recipe, but I lacked the soul." "The soul is in the intention," Hope replied with wisdom, "in the love you put into what you create." As the afternoon progressed, the atmosphere in the square became increasingly festive. Traditional New Orleans musicians began to play, inspiring spontaneous dances among the attendees. The bread of unity, shared among hundreds of people, had created a sense of community that transcended simple gastronomic tasting. In a moment of calm, as they watched the celebration from a quiet corner, Lucy and Diego were approached by an older man they hadn't seen before. He introduced himself as Joaquin Mendez, official chronicler of New Orleans. "I have documented the history of this city for 40 years, he explained, "and I can tell you that what you have achieved today is exceptional. The rivalry between the Ramirez and Vargas families was part of our collective identity, for better or worse. Your reconciliation marks the beginning of a new chapter for New Orleans." "We just wanted to discover the truth," Lucy responded modestly. "And you found much more," Joaquin observed. "You found a future." His words resonated deeply with Lucy. A future. That was precisely what lay before them. A horizon of possibilities that just a few weeks ago would have seemed unattainable. As night began to fall over New Orleans, illuminating the square with warm lights that created dancing shadows among the festival stalls, Lucy sought a moment alone with Diego. She found him conversing animatedly with his cousin Javier, but seeing her approach, he excused himself to join her. "It's been an incredible day," he commented, as they walked towards a quieter end of the square. "More than incredible," Lucy agreed. "Almost unreal. Who would have imagined we'd be here just 3 weeks ago?" They stopped by an old quarry stone fountain, the sound of the water creating an oasis of tranquility amidst the festivity. Diego took Lucy's hands in his expression suddenly serious. "I've been thinking," he began, "about what the chronicler said, about the future." "Me too," she admitted. "There's so much we could do now that our families are reconciling. The bakeries could collaborate, exchange techniques, perhaps even Unite, Diego completed. As originally intended. Lucy looked at him in surprise. Are you suggesting... I'm suggesting we think big, he replied enthusiastically. The bread of unity doesn't have to be just a symbol of the past. It could be the beginning of something new, something we build together. Bread of the soul and the wheat crown under one roof? Lucy considered the idea, visualizing the possibilities. Our families would have to agree. After what we've seen today, I think it's more possible than you imagine, Diego said, taking another step closer to her. But there's something more important I want to ask you, Lucy. Her heart skipped a beat, recognizing the intensity in his gaze. What is it? Beyond the bakeries, our families, all this legacy, what do you want? What future do you envision for us? The question hung between them, laden with meaning and possibilities. Lucy looked towards the square where their families, for so long separated by pride and misunderstandings, now shared laughter and conversation, as if the 30 years of distance had never existed. I want a future where the bread we bake together symbolizes something bigger than ourselves, she finally responded, turning her gaze back to Diego. Where what we build honors the past but isn't limited by it. Where every day is a new opportunity to create something extraordinary, together. Diego smiled, recognizing in her words the echo of his own desires. Then we are on the same path, he said softly, leaning in to kiss her. As their lips met, with the sound of the celebration as a backdrop and the aroma of the bread of unity still lingering in the air, Lucy felt a deep certainty. The circle that had remained open for 30 years had finally closed, but not in an end, but in a new beginning full of possibilities. And in that moment, she knew exactly what form that shared future would take. A year had passed since the historic New Orleans Bread Festival. The city's central square gleamed under the morning sun as workers put the finishing touches on the facade of the building, occupying the most prominent corner. The old property, restored with meticulous respect for its original colonial elements, now displayed a carved wooden sign combining two emblematic symbols, a wheat crown intertwined with a heart. Soul and Crown Ramirez Vargas Bakery, it read in golden letters beneath the emblem. Lucy contemplated the facade from across the square, a mixture of pride and nostalgia in her gaze. The past year had brought transformations that not even in her most optimistic dreams would she have imagined that night when she and Diego discovered the truth about their families. Past, ready for the big day? Diego's voice interrupted her thoughts. She turned to find him carrying a box with the last utensils they would move to the new premises. I can hardly believe it's actually happening, she replied, accepting the coffee he offered her. A year ago we were on opposite sides, and now we're about to inaugurate the unified bakery our grandparents dreamed of 3 decades ago, he completed, placing his arm around her shoulders. Life has strange ways of closing circles, don't you think? The process of unifying Bread of the Soul and the Wheat Crown had begun as a tentative idea after the festival, but quickly gained momentum when both families recognized the practical and symbolic advantages of such a merger. Gabriel and Hope, revitalized by the reconciliation, had been the main promoters, working tirelessly to convince the most reluctant, primarily Salvador, of the project's merits. What no one expected was that the story of the Ramirez and Vargas families, their rivalry and reconciliation, would capture the imagination of the entire United States. A documentary produced by a national network had narrated the family saga, turning the Bread of Unity into a cultural phenomenon that attracted tourists from all over the country to New Orleans. The combined recipes of both families, published in a book that became a bestseller, had renewed interest in traditional Southern American baking internationally. Your father seems nervous, Diego commented, pointing towards the entrance of the new premises, where Salvador meticulously supervised the placement of decorative flowers. Lucy smiled. It's his way of showing emotion. He'll never admit it, but he's proud of what we've achieved. The change in Salvador had perhaps been the most surprising of all. Although initially skeptical about the unification, he had gradually become one of its most enthusiastic proponents, especially after Gabriel offered him to lead the expansion of the business to other cities. The Ramirez's always had better commercial vision than us, Gabriel had humbly acknowledged. We need that perspective to grow. As the inauguration time approached, the square began to fill. The residents of New Orleans, who had followed every step of the process with interest, gathered to witness this new chapter in the history of their most emblematic baking families. Among the crowd, Lucy distinguished familiar faces. Isabella, who had photographically documented the entire transformation, Anthony Fuentes, who had closed his business in Savannah to re-establish himself in New Orleans as an advisor to the new bakery, Joaquin Mendez, the chronicler, who was now completing a book on the history of both families. "We should go in," Diego suggested, checking his watch. "The ceremony will begin soon." The interior of Soul and Crown was a harmonious fusion of the aesthetics of both original bakeries. The traditional clay ovens preferred by the Ramirezes coexisted with modern equipment adopted by the Vargas. Classic recipes were displayed alongside contemporary innovations. Historical photographs of both families adorned the walls, visually telling the evolution of their shared legacy. In the heart of the establishment, occupying a place of honor, stood a silver reproduction of the original Bread of Unity mold, mounted on a base of live oak wood carved by local artisans. A commemorative plaque read, "To honor the past and celebrate the future." Ramirez and Vargas, two families, one legacy. Gabriel and Hope were already there, conversing animatedly with Mariana, who, to everyone's surprise, had become a fundamental part of the reconciliation process. Her external perspective and her ability to mediate had proven invaluable during the inevitable tensions that arose throughout the year. "There are our young visionaries," Gabriel announced upon seeing them enter. "The architects of this new era." Lucy blushed at the compliment. "You did the hardest work, Mr. Gabriel. Convincing my father was no easy task." "Your father is a wise man who just needed time," Gabriel replied with an affectionate smile. "In the end, we all needed time to heal." Michael and Raphael appeared carrying the centerpiece of the inauguration, a recreation of the Bread of Unity, even more elaborate than the original, enriched with new elements symbolizing the evolution of their shared history. "This time we added a special touch," Michael explained. "Seeds from every region of the United States, to represent how our story has inspired bakers across the country." It was true. The ripple effect of their reconciliation had transcended the personal to become a broader cultural phenomenon. Soul and Crown was not just a bakery, it was a symbol of how past divisions could transform into strengths for the future. When it was time for the inauguration ceremony, the complete families gathered behind the main counter. Hope, whose health had notably strengthened over the past year, spoke first. 30 years ago, a misunderstanding separated our families," she began, her voice clear and strong despite her age. "Today, thanks to the courage of our grandchildren, we celebrate not only a reunification but a rebirth," Gabriel continued, his hand firmly intertwined with Hope's. "This place is much more than a business. It is a testament that it is never too late to correct the mistakes of the past, to heal old wounds, to build bridges where there were once walls." Salvador stepped forward, visibly emotional. "And it is a legacy for future generations," he added, looking proudly at Lucy and Diego, "so that they never forget that shared roots are stronger than divided branches." Finally, it was Lucy and Diego's turn. They looked at each other briefly, a silent conversation passing between them, as had happened so many times during the past year. "When we began this journey," Diego said, "we were only looking for answers about the past. We never imagined we would find a path to the future. A future we are building together, step by step, day by day," Lucy completed. "Like the bread we bake with patience, with attention to every detail, and above all, with love." The mayor of New Orleans, present for the occasion, officially cut the inaugural ribbon amidst enthusiastic applause from the attendees. The doors of Soul and Crown opened wide, welcoming a new era for the Ramirez and Vargas families and for the baking tradition of New Orleans. As the first customers entered the establishment, Lucy and Diego momentarily stepped away from the bustle to share a private moment. From his jacket pocket, Diego pulled out a small blue velvet box. "I wanted to find the perfect moment," he said, opening the box to reveal a delicate ring where a tiny white gold wheat crown embraced an amber heart. "And what better time than this, when everything we dreamed of is taking shape?" Lucy's eyes filled with tears as she extended her left hand. "Yes," she simply replied, knowing she didn't need to say more. The ring slipped perfectly onto her finger, sealing a promise that had begun to form since that first meeting in front of the wheat crown a year ago. "Now we'll really have to update the sign," she joked through tears of happiness. "Ramirez Vargas in every sense." "It was always our destiny," Diego replied, leaning in to kiss her, "long before we were born." As they returned to the celebration, where their unified families proudly shared the fruits of their joint legacy, Lucy felt a deep certainty. The circle that had remained open for 30 years had finally closed, but not in an end, but in a new beginning full of possibilities, like the bread they baked every day, formed by human hands but transformed by the fire of life into something greater, something that nourishes, that unites, that endures beyond those who created it.